Tonight's On the Road segment is sponsored.
Not being there for my family.
Andrei Rublev winning his semifinal match during a tournament. This was in Dubai. Then writing right here on the lens, "No war, please," on the camera. He said it's important to have peace in the world and to respect each other no matter what, to be united. Here's the view from the other side tonight. Of course, that message to Putin. When we come back here from Paris to London to New York City tonight, the message in lights.
Looking to get back
of the hobo.
The best KELO Live Doppler HD, where technology counts.
The snowfall amounts of a foot to maybe a foot and a half.
so dust.
Agreements. All that gibberish about who said what and when in Normandy 4 by no means can justify the offensive. By no means can justify thousands and thousands of your troops on our territory. Your today's call of your president to the Ukrainian army to remove the government of Ukraine, are you crazy? Show respect for the core principles enshrined in the UN Charter. Sovereign equality, non-use of force or threat of force against territorial integrity and political independence. In my opening remarks, I said that parents of ambassadors here, all ambassadors but you, are proud of their children. And children of the ambassadors are proud of their parents. It's so painful to think what your family think about you when you lie every day. The Russian people deserve peace, democracy. The Russian people deserve liberty, and they will have it. If not tomorrow, because tomorrow is not possible, then probably in near future. Thank you.
Just on one thing, and to calm members of the council, there was a lot to comment on the representative of Ukraine. I will leave the abortionist at his conscience, on his conscience. This is a matter of his conscience, that is the abortionist with which he addressed the council. But I say one thing, this is a report yesterday, the Russian Defense Ministry, yesterday, 24 February, the units of the Russian paratrooper division took full control of area in the Chernobyl nuclear power plant area. Military services took the, by Ukraine, an agreement was reached about the joint provision of security for the sarcophagus and other units in the power plant. We do not want Ukraine to generate a dirty bomb. The representatives of the Defense Ministry noted that personnel of the stations continue to carry out service there, and they are monitoring the radioactive situation, their radioactive situation. And this is a report from Vienna. The level of radiation in the Chernobyl nuclear power plant is low. The threat to population does not exist. This was announced on Friday by the Director General of the IAEA. The list of speakers is closed. The meeting stands adjourned.
The Russian military has begun a brutal
Approach and a new perspective. And let's take a look at our evening planner for, first of all, for Pierce. 20 degrees right now, clear. We'll keep it clear down to 9 degrees by midnight, but then temperature steady or slowly rising. That'll be the trend for Aberdeen as well. Sun not quite down just yet. It's 12 degrees, down to the single digits, but then steady or slowly rising after midnight. And in
Driving Weekly, secure yours today.
Wake up with Alexandra, Eric, and Aaron every weekday morning on Dakota News Now.
Dear Winter, my squad of 16.
This is Dakota News Now. It is 6 o'clock, and good evening, everyone. I'm Brian Allen. Andrea is away from the desk tonight. If you're a homeowner and haven't received your annual notice from the county, you soon will. Property assessments need to be mailed by March 1st from every.
Breaking news tonight on several fronts. The battle for Ukraine's capital as Russian troops advance on the city. Russia's forces now moving in after missiles rained down on the capital. Apartment buildings and schools destroyed. Street battles breaking out and shocking images. A tank crushing a civilian car. Ukraine's defense ministry urging civilians to use Molotov cocktails against Russian forces. The new move from the White House today, personally sanctioning Vladimir Putin. It comes as massive demonstrations erupt in Russia and around the world. And the urgent race to escape Ukraine. 100,000 people fleeing their homes and millions more expected. Our team at the border. Also tonight, President Biden revealing his historic pick for the Supreme Court. KETANJI Brown Jackson. If confirmed, she would be the first black woman to serve as a justice. Her message today to the nation, and now the confirmation battle ahead in the Senate. And the major news from the CDC on masks. The agency easing its guidelines, saying masks are no longer needed indoors for more than 70% of Americans, regardless of vaccination status. And that goes for schools, too. The science behind the change.
This is NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt.
Good evening. They are fighting for their country. How a senior U.S. defense official is describing Ukrainian military forces said tonight to be putting up more resistance than Russian forces expected. Ukraine claiming it shot down a Russian aircraft over Kiev overnight. Still, Russia appears to have its sights set on taking the capital, where firefights have broken out on the streets. Ukrainians well aware that only a third of Russian forces surrounding their country have actually entered the country so far. The White House tonight trying to inflict more pain on Vladimir Putin, levying financial sanctions on Putin himself. With battles and airstrikes taking place across the country, Ukrainians and foreigners alike are desperately trying to flee. Our team has it all covered again tonight. Richard Engel starts us off now from inside Ukraine.
The barbarity of Russia's assault on Ukraine may be captured in this single video. Though not confirmed by NBC News, witnesses say that's a Russian tank veering into a civilian car in Kiev. The woman who filmed it sounds equally frightened and horrified. Then, even after backing over the car, miraculously, the driver appears to have survived. Passers-by prying him out. The Russian advance is now closing in on the Ukrainian capital. The sanctions leveled by President Biden and U.S. allies are not changing Vladimir Putin's mind. In pockets of Kiev, there are street battles and apartment buildings destroyed. But the Ukrainian military is putting up a tough fight. A Ukrainian official says this fireball was a Russian jet shot down. Tonight, a senior U.S. defense official says Ukrainian resistance is greater than Moscow anticipated. That Russian momentum has slowed. It's captured no population centers. Still, these are early days, and 2/3 of Russia's forces have yet to enter the country. The toll of the invasion so far is heartbreaking. This was a school in eastern Ukraine. The New York Times posting this video reportedly showing infants move from an ICU to a makeshift bomb shelter. Today, Ukraine's President Zelensky blasting the West for not doing more to help, pleading for tougher sanctions on Russia and saying he's Russia's #1 target. His family, now in hiding, is #2. And reportedly telling EU officials on a video call, "This might be the last time you see me alive." Later, he appeared on the street saying, "The citizens are here and we are here. We defend our independence." Ukrainians face a more powerful army, but so far are not flinching. Ukraine's government is calling on all men of fighting age, 18 to 60, to take up arms. People in trucks passing out guns to civilians. On Ukrainian television, they're broadcasting instructions on how to make Molotov cocktails. And this video appearing on Ukrainian news agencies purportedly showing Ukraine's Tank Man, a brave civilian trying to block a convoy of Russian vehicles on the highway. We went out in Mariupol where they're lining up to donate blood.
Valentina, why are you doing this today?
I come here to give
blood for our soldiers, which protect my country, my people from Russian aggression. Russia attacks our peaceful, sleeping cities.
As the battle is now underway to take Ukraine's major cities and capture the capital.
Russia today said it's open to Ukraine's offer for peace talks, but they seem unlikely, with Putin once again calling the Ukrainian government neo-Nazis and demanding that its military surrender first. Lester?
Richard Engel starting us off. Thank you. And as Russian forces step up their assault on Kiev tonight, there is chaos, fear, and defiance, with millions of Ukrainians caught in the middle. Aaron McLaughlin is there.
The Russians have arrived in the capital. Gunfire heard in the shadow of St. Michael's Golden Dome. Residents told to shelter in place after alleged Russian soldiers were killed while wearing Ukrainian uniforms, according to troops at the scene. Civilians taking up arms and on patrol as they're warned they no longer know who is on their streets. At the central station, mayhem. Thousands trying to cram into carriages, hoisting their children onto the train. Anything to get them to safety. As police fire warning shots to disperse the crowd. Those who can't leave hunker below ground.
This is still a functioning metro station, yet for so many people here, it's the only place they can go when the sirens go off.
Anastasia is sheltering here with her two best friends and her cat.
Worried and scared, but we will win. We want to be free, that's why we are fighting.
Overnight, an apartment building was heavily damaged. Hours later, resident Katya, fighting tears, sings the Ukrainian national anthem as she surveys what's left of her home. Her grandfather was given this apartment decades ago, a gift for his service after the Soviet-Afghan war. Now collateral damage of yet another Russian conflict. Long live Ukraine, she says. Tonight promises more terror for the residents of Kyiv. Many here feel as though they're reliving the horrors of the past.
But I guess the one history lesson we learned is that no one learns lessons of history.
A country haunted by the past, now unsure if it even has a future.
Aaron joining us now. And Aaron, Ukraine's president predicting a full-scale assault from Russia tonight on the capital. What's happening at this hour where you are?
Lester, earlier today there was a gun battle just a few miles from where I'm standing. It was the first time we've heard gunfire, an ominous sign, but otherwise right now it's eerily quiet. Lester?
Aaron, you and your team continue to be safe. Thank you. Just breaking this evening, the White House now says the U.S. will impose individual sanctions on Vladimir Putin and Russia's foreign minister. Kelly O'Donnell is following this from the White House. Kelly, what does this mean and why now?
Well, the president is joining allies on this, Lester, the United Kingdom and the European Union. They move first to sanction Putin, his foreign minister Sergei Lavrov, and top Russian officials. This is a change from just yesterday when President Biden said imposing a direct financial penalty against Putin was simply on the table. Sanctioning a head of state is rare and is intended to further isolate Putin. But the practical and punitive impact is less clear because Putin's immense wealth is believed to be carefully hidden, making it harder to target. Lester?
Kelly O'Donnell, thank you. With Russian forces sweeping through Ukraine with warplanes, tanks, even amphibious vehicles, we want to map out their movements for you tonight. Pentagon correspondent Courtney Kuby joins me now. Courtney, map this out for us.
So for nearly 48 hours, Russia's large-scale invasion has targeted Ukraine with missile and airstrikes directed at Ukrainian military sites all over the country. Now, Russian troops are focusing on three main axes of attack. From the north, Russian tanks rolled south from Belarus and western Russia around Chernobyl to encircle the capital city, Kyiv, with the goal of isolating and ultimately completely taking it over. From the east, Russian paratroopers and artillery focused on Kharkiv, which is still seeing heavy fighting. And from the south, Russian assets from Crimea focused on Kherson, and just hours ago began moving northeast towards Mariupol and the Donbass region. As the Russian military tries to take over the eastern half of the country, the Ukrainian military is fighting back, making Russia's fight more difficult than some experts anticipated. Lester?
Courtney Kuby, thank you. And this evening, stories of desperation from some of the tens of thousands of people who have already fled the fighting in Ukraine.
Their government
threatening their children, their relatives. They have no choice but to stand and fight. And now, look, what we need to do, though, and where we can make a difference, is we can begin our programs of continued defensive weapons, offensive weapons. We can provide a Lend-Lease program. Look, we're not talking right now about sending in our troops into Ukraine because we don't have a legal authorization to do so. But we can most certainly provide them with lethal weapons to help defend themselves. I think the American people understand freedom, and they understand what it means to defend your country. That's something that we all have in common with Ukrainians.
Yes, indeed. And let me ask you one quick follow to that I think is very important now. Obviously, it's clear there will be no U.S. troops on the ground in Ukraine. That would be a direct war between two nuclear superpowers. But when you talk about providing offensive weapons at this point in the process, do you have any fear that that could also provoke a direct attack from Russia and perhaps a very much bigger and more horrific war than the one we're seeing now?
Right now, with the attitude that Vladimir Putin has been putting forward, anything is possible. He clearly has been cold and calculating, and he clearly feels that in that geographic region he has the upper hand. I think he's going to be surprised at the amount of resistance, but I think he's also going to be surprised at the solidarity that members of NATO are going to express and other members of the other members of the European Union are going to express. Yeah. And look, what we can do right now is to express as strongly as we can our support. But even more than that, unilaterally, there are some things that we can do to limit his ability to wage war. We should be creating as much energy in this country as we possibly can. Natural gas should be not only created, but we should be exporting it as quickly as possible. Same thing with petroleum products. We have to get Europe out from underneath the control of Vladimir Putin. And right now, that means taking away the gas station, which is Russia.
Right, absolutely. Thank you very much, Senator. I appreciate your time. And now I want to go to retired U.S. Army Major General James Spider Marks at the Magic Word.
Ever has before.
I can only hope that my life and career, my love of this country and the Constitution, will inspire future generations of Americans.
President Biden praised Jackson as one of the nation's brightest legal minds and cast her groundbreaking nomination this week as evidence of our enduring democracy.
As we watch freedom and liberty under attack abroad, I'm here to fulfill my responsibilities under the Constitution.
The president delivering the news to Jackson in a call last night, keeping this campaign promise he made 2 years ago today.
I'm looking forward to making sure there's a black woman on the Supreme Court to make sure that, in fact, for too long, our government, our courts, haven't looked like America.
If confirmed, Jackson won't change the ideological makeup of the 6-3 conservative court. Just 8 months ago, Jackson was confirmed to the Federal Appeals Court here in Washington with the votes of 3 Senate Republicans, including Lindsey Graham. But today, Graham tweeted the radical left has won President Biden over yet again. Still, if all 50 Democrats stick together, Jackson will be confirmed, fulfilling a dream dating back to her high school yearbook, where she wrote, "I want to go into law and eventually have a judicial appointment." Today, sharing a loving message with her daughters.
Please know that whatever title I may hold or whatever job I may have, I will still be your mom.
Looking to become one of 9 justices with a singular place in history. Peter Alexander, NBC News, the White House.
This is Pete Williams. KETANJI Brown Jackson already knows her way around the Supreme Court. She was a law clerk for Justice Stephen Breyer, the man she's been nominated to succeed. She's now a judge on the Federal Appeals Court in Washington, confirmed for that position just 8 months ago.
She's an amazing person.
One of her supporters has been Paul Ryan, the former Republican Speaker of the House. His in-laws and hers are related. Judge Jackson was born in Washington but grew up in Miami, where her mother was a school administrator and her father was a lawyer for the school board.
I would sit at the dining room table doing my homework with my father. He had all of his law books stacked up, and I had all of my coloring books stacked up. And when I think back to those times, there really is no question that my interest in the law began that early on.
She graduated from Harvard and Harvard Law, and that's where she met her husband, Patrick, now a surgeon. They have 2 daughters, ages 17 and 21. If confirmed, she'd be the first black woman ever on the Supreme Court, and the first justice since Thurgood Marshall, who retired 30 years ago, with significant experience defending accused criminals. She's a former public defense lawyer. For the past 8 years, she's been a federal trial judge, and at her confirmation hearing for the appeals court, she was asked what role race would play in her decisions.
I don't think that race plays a role in the kind of judge that I have been and that I would be. It's sort of like the Oliver Wendell Holmes quote that the life of the law is not logic, it's experience.
And at age 51, she'd be one of the youngest on the current court, second only to Amy Coney Barrett, who just turned 50 last month. Lester?
Pete Williams, thank you. In just 60 seconds, President Putin upends American politics. Former President Trump making headlines. And later, the CDC's new guidance on masks, what you need to know.
Welcome to Allstate.
Other
1 and 2.
News to share a little earlier today. Take a look at this.
As whether you've got a big family and you're looking to expand, or if you have a small family like myself and you just found out you're going to have a baby, looking to get an upgrade here, Alexander, there's plenty of stuff for everyone.
Now, you heard that right. Ernest Cottier picked the perfect opportunity today to announce that he and his wife are going to have a baby. And you can tell from Alexander's face there that Ernie had told nobody about the news before this morning. From all of us here, we want to say congratulations to the Cottier family. That is some really good news
That's
indeed.
pretty awesome. And you know, I miss Ernie. He works in the mornings now, so opposite shifts, and so congratulations to him. But I like to see him once in a while. I don't see him anymore.
Yeah, yeah, he's a good guy. Congratulations to them.
Yeah, way to go, Dad. So here's a look at, first of all, I'm going to show you that we are starting to turn the corner. Let's look back at the last few days.
Him in the same category as Peter the Great. But when we watch as this ruthless battle unfolds, Putin is looking more and more like Ivan the Terrible, the Russian tyrant who conquered vast amounts of land, killed lots of people, and eventually lost his mind. In an op-ed, my next guest writes this: the more of the country Putin tries to seize, the more resistance he will face. If he tries to seize the whole thing, then he risks igniting an even greater conflict. Perhaps in the coming days, the question of crazy will be answered. Arthur Douglas Murray joins me now. So, do you think he's crazy, or are we about to find out?
I think we're about to find out. It's been always a discussion for more than 20 years with Vladimir Putin. I cite in that op-ed in the New York Post a conversation that Condoleezza Rice had about 8 years ago, where she recalled one of her last meetings with Putin, who said to her, "You know us, you know that we always need a strong man. You know, Alexander II, Peter the Great," and she said she wondered whether he had Vladimir the Great there somewhere in his mind. And she said then, in I think 2014, she said, there is a 5% chance that he's not rational at all. Now, of course, the problem with Putin is, in one way, what he's doing by his own lights is entirely rational. He laments the loss of the Soviet Union. He believes that he should be able to put it together. He pretends that Ukraine isn't a country, which it is. He pretends it's a sort of invention and that he can just roll into it and murder the citizens until he gets his way. And by his own lights, in a way, that's rational. But in another way, of course, it isn't at all. Because it's perfectly possible that what Vladimir Putin is doing is a massive overreach for him, for the Russian armed forces, for the Russian economy, for the Russian people. None of them need this. None of them need the Russian economy tanking. None of them need these further rounds of sanctions and the loss of hundreds, perhaps thousands of Russian troops in the Ukraine. But that's one of the things that's possible, as it is possible that he fails in his mission. So as I say, this question of is he actually rational or not may well be answered in the coming days.
It'll be answered when we see how the siege at the Capitol plays out. If he does this strategically, surrounds it, squeezes Zelensky, maybe forces him to a negotiating table somewhere, and then just gets concession after concession, that would make me think he's rational. But if he goes in bloodthirsty and puts a bullet in this guy's head,
yes,
in front of the entire world, that tells me this guy's sick in the head and we're dealing with a maniac. Do you agree?
Yes, I do, and there's other signals of that. I mean, his absolutely deranged speech from the Kremlin this week, he gave a totally fantastical version of history, just filled with falsehoods that only Vladimir Putin can believe. You know, he's been holed up in the Kremlin for the last 2 years trying to dodge COVID. He has a greater fear of COVID than Queen Elizabeth II at the age of 95. He doesn't allow anyone within 40 feet of him. Visitors have to be detained for weeks beforehand and then sprayed with chemicals before meeting him. But I wouldn't trust the chemicals the Kremlin sprays. But you know, so he's been in this isolation. He gave this speech filled with just mad versions of history. But here was one of the worrying things. It was also, of course, blood-curdling. These threats he's made about outside forces if they dare to step in. These were blood-curdling threats from Vladimir Putin. He's coming up to the age of 70. There's all sorts of rumors about his health. He seems to think perhaps that this is his legacy. But there's an enormous amount of pain coming for him and everybody else if he pursues this path. Your previous guest quite understandably referred to the Baltic states, and here we get into real trouble, because it's true that the whole debate about Ukraine and whether or not they should be or not be in NATO has been a very tricky issue for the Europeans for many years now. But of course the Baltic states are in NATO. If they were to be threatened, if they were to be, let alone invaded by Vladimir Putin, Article 5 of the NATO treaty demands that all of NATO come in and defend those countries. At that point, of course, we get into a whole different scenario. That's a World War scenario.
Yeah, and you don't know how unstable he is, because he seemed to suggest that he was willing to use nuclear weapons if anybody interfered in this conquest, which really changes the calculation. All right, Douglas Murray, thank you so much.
To help reduce fogging.
You gotta love that.
Never Lost mask is durable. Why?
And news.
Deadwood is expecting thousands of people this weekend. The city urges everyone to be responsible.
Sounds like a party. And the city also reminds people to take advantage of the ride-share options in town, including taxi services and trolleys.
Plan gives you a free home valuation.
We want to give people a break from things like mask wearing when our levels are low, and then have the ability to reach for them again should things get worse in the future.
Basing its previous guidelines on transmission risk, 95% of the country, shown here in red, needed to mask indoors. But now they're only suggested in regions where cases and hospitalizations are high, seen in orange. But despite the new guidance, states like New York and California still require masks in the classroom for now. The same true for transportation. The TSA saying the mask requirement remains in place, and we will continue to assess the duration of the requirement in consultation with the CDC.
We're entering a new phase of the pandemic, where we are now, I think, away from this kind of emergency phase. We really need to enter a period of time where we learn how to live with this virus.
7 months after recommending masks again during the Delta surge, tonight a clear sign of change seen on the faces of Americans. Miguel Almaguer, NBC News.
Also tonight, as we observe Black History Month, a developing trend across the country. Black families moving away from big cities in numbers so large it's being called the new Great Migration. Ron Allen takes a closer look at one city determined to get black families to stay.
Tamika Young has wonderful memories of life in Detroit, its vibrant black communities, the music of Motown, the Motor City, the D.
You were a lifelong Detroiter.
I represented Detroit. We wear Detroit wherever we go.
But Young just left the city, her new suburban neighborhood much different from the street where she used to live.
Just to look at the vacant houses, the overgrown yards, people don't have pride like they used to.
You really wanted to get out of Detroit badly.
I did. Within a 2-week span, there were 2 shootouts on our block.
Young now lives in East Point, where so many black families have moved, they're now the majority of the population, a city that just elected its first African-American mayor. Young's adult son moved even further, to Savannah, Georgia, for a better job opportunity. They're part of what's been called the new or reverse Great Migration. Steep population declines continuing in 9 of the 10 U.S. cities with the most black residents, hundreds of thousands of residents since 2000. Moving for better jobs, schools, and quality of life. In Detroit, some signs of progress. but the black population continuing to decline. Pamela Martin Turner is trying to revive Detroit's North End.
When you look around here, what do you see?
I see a community of people living here and enjoying the neighborhood. I see homes.
A lot of people see vacant lots.
Oh, they lack imagination.
It's a historic neighborhood where decades ago, black Detroiters who arrived during the first Great Migration bought homes and owned them for generations.
There's opportunity here. It's a wonderful city that has all the art and the culture and music galore.
She hopes to break ground this year, a Detroiter who left and came back, trying to help build a place where its residents want to stay. Ron Allen, NBC News, Detroit.
And up next, I'll have some reflections on war and what we've seen in this monumental week.
Plaque psoriasis, the burning, itching, the pain.
Emerge Tremfyant. With Tremfya, adults with moderate to severe plaque psoriasis can uncover clearer skin and improve symptoms at 16 weeks.
Serious allergic.
But I was not afraid. I had a tank, he says. But by dawn, it was a case of the Russians are coming, but also maybe not. Ukrainian forces had reclaimed the bridge, but not without a cost. I asked Victor if the Russians would move back.
Yes, Russians, no far away. Russians, about 3,000 meters.
Locals picked through the wreckage for ammunition.
It's just strange to see civilians picking up leftover armour from vehicles here. It shows you how many people are involved now on a local level in this war effort. Look, he's doing it again. They're just stopping everywhere to pick up whatever they can.
It's unclear if the bodies here were discarded because they were Russians or because there were just too many. The Ukrainian military you can see here is the bit that was pushed back. The defenders, still holding this bridge, stayed hidden, waving our cameras away from their positions. On the bridge, the living surreally passing the dead.
Okay, удачи. Just saying the Russians are on the other side of the bridge, but you can't see them, but they aren't disturbing civilians.
Anyone who wants to run Ukraine needs this tortured piece of concrete.
This is the Dnieper River, which basically cuts Ukraine into the side here, which connects to Russia, and this side, which connects to Europe. A vital piece of Ukraine to fight over, and it's been obviously very intense here in the past days.
There are no winners here, just holes that will need filling in, and shreds of lives that need collecting. Vladimir is here, helping himself to a hot dog. The other Vladimir, Putin, wants to steal lives here whole for his wider vision of empire restored. For the people in this town, it means afternoons with the noise of rockets landing in the streets. That dusk, the balance of power changed again. Shells landed around Ukrainian positions, and it seemed near houses. Ambulances unable to get in. Then came this noise, the sound of an attack helicopter. Acute violence that seems to have led the bridge to change hands again. Minutes later, local officials said the city's defences had fallen. But victories here are laden with loss and so bitter in the mouth.
We have still, Erin, been hearing the sounds of blast impacts distant to this city still tonight, even amongst this deathly chilling silence, frankly. So there is obviously some fighting still going on. It may not be definitive that the Russians have taken that key bridge, but it is very important they even have intermittent control, because we think that last night when they did have that moment where it was in their hands, a lot of troops passed over. Some seem to have gone east towards separate areas, some seem to have gone west as well. And that will be deeply troubling, I think, for those trying to defend Kiev at this moment, that there is possibly another route from the south that could assist with that onslaught. Erin?
Yeah, thank you so much, Nick. You know, when you think about it, all of those howitzers, artillery coming over the border near Kharkiv, all of those troops coming in where you are, amphibious troops coming. There are so many troops and so much equipment that has come into this country that nobody actually knows where it is right now. but it's here, and it's going somewhere, and it's going to do something. And that is what's contributing to just this palpable sense of fear, just that is everywhere. And next, the breaking news, reports of heavy fighting right now in Kyiv. We're also going to take you to a small town that is now just packed, overwhelmed with refugees after being hit by missiles. Plus, Biden sanctions Putin. Well, it's a nice headline, but does it mean anything to the Russian president?
A Ford built for you, by you. Charles and Touchstone Energy Cooperatives.
And the stars caught in the crossfire.
Across the area for this evening, here's your Sioux Falls evening planner. It's 10 degrees right now, and temperatures won't be changing very much over the next few hours. Will remain clear overnight tonight. In Aberdeen, it's 12 degrees at the moment. You'll be falling back to the single digits by 8 o'clock. And again, temperatures not dropping off too much for tonight. That wind steady right around 10 miles an hour. And in Pierre, nice looking view tonight. It's 20 for you at the moment. You'll be down to 9 degrees by midnight. It's going to be much warmer heading into Saturday. We'll talk about that coming up.
Tyler, spring is right around the corner, and many of us might be looking forward to doing some home improvements, and there's a perfect opportunity to discuss those ideas with some businesses and get some inspiration.
But first, property assessment paperwork is due by the beginning of March. But before you send it out, you may want to review it. We'll tell you why. Those stories and more coming up on Dakota News Now at 6:30.
This is Dakota News Now.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us. I'm Scott Ingen.
And I'm Cordell Wright. If you're a homeowner and you haven't received your annual notice from the county, you will soon. Property assessment needs to be mailed.
Hart, there's no telling where life may take you.
Where a two-front war could happen, and the best time if you're China to act is now. Now, I'm not saying that they're necessarily going to go. I don't know what's in Xi Jinping's mind, and people who are saying that they know what's in Xi Jinping's mind are probably not telling anybody else the truth. But what the reality right now, Jesse, is we've got to make sure we retain the capacity to defeat a Chinese invasion of Taiwan, even as we stand with NATO, help the Ukrainians and so forth. And that's a really tough problem because we've had years of spending less on defense than would be necessary to do that, of not being focused, despite the work we did in the Trump administration to try to focus us on this problem. So we're in a really bad way. But the key is we need to be clear-minded and strategic. And frankly, look, we're the good guys, but we need to bring a little bit of the ruthlessness and the rigor and the clear-headedness that our opponents are sometimes willing to
happened under Donald Trump. His former national security advisor is with us in a minute.
Homelight uses the same.
And they did know Czar, they did.
Of course, for peace talks, but we are not ready to capitulate or we are not ready to surrender. When we have, or if we have more information about that, because we only heard what we heard, like you, in the press.
But there has not been any direct communication about potentially setting anything up, even through or even through.
Nothing I can share with you now. More questions?
Can you authenticate that the now famous audio clip from Serpent Island is authentic? The F Russia, is that an authentic tape or is that disinformation?
It was shared by our commander-in-chief, and we're proud that those 13 military men responded like they should have responded to a proposal to surrender.
So you're authenticating that as an accurate tape, audio clip. It's not made up or after the fact.
Well, you know, being in Washington, D.C., I cannot check personally, so to authenticate. But yes, it's you know, it was shared by the official sources of Ukraine.
Just to follow up on the disinformation, we heard warnings that Russia would attempt to demoralize Ukrainian forces with false reports of surrenders. Are you seeing any evidence that that is occurring?
We see the attempts, but we know that so far during the 48 hours, only people who surrendered, and we have it on the video, and we have actually them in captivity, are the Russian forces. So we also would like here to ask all of you to take information from the official sources from Ukraine. Our commander-in-chief, our territorial defense, our armed forces, they all are very active and put in all the information in Ukrainian, English, and other languages, and we also duplicate it on the embassy resources on a regular basis. So please take it from there, and our security service is also monitoring closely all the disinformation attacks, because again, this attack, even though now we all focused, of course, on the direct military attack, but the hybrid attack didn't disappear from there. So they're trying to spread the disinformation, they're trying to spread fakes, they're trying to, that's why in Ukraine, and I also want to tell you that all Ukrainian channels now work as one. They united not only our political parties, all united, not only our, parliamentary groups united and work together in light of this attack, but also all the TV stations in Ukraine now work together and provide our citizens with the up-to-date, correct information on a regular basis, plus informing citizens what they should do, where they should go, what are the numbers to contact, also on a regular basis. So, you know, we know that there is a lot of many disinformation efforts, but we seem to battle them quite successfully for the moment.
Madam Ambassador, on Chernobyl, have you received any guidance from the United States or NATO, considering there was fighting going on there and how delicate that region is? Has anyone reached out to give you some next steps and share intelligence, that sort of thing, about that specific area?
Well, we are reaching out to everyone, and we are informing everyone and all the regulatory bodies that have to do with especially the nuclear stations. Again, nuclear industry is quite large in Ukraine. A large portion of our energy, electricity generation is nuclear. We have quite a number of power plants. That's why we put special emphasis on guarding them against the enemy, so that we responsibly can run them even during the time of these attacks. So with the Chernobyl plant, our National Guard fiercely defended it until it was taken over. But again, in defending these plants, we are trying to be very responsible and careful so that there is no damage to it. We cannot say the same about Russian Federation. So that's why we are warning, and that's why we're reaching out to everyone. So this is the issue that has to be discussed, that Russia has to be specifically pressed on this particular topic.
And have you gotten a response from anyone?
Пані посол, скажіть, будь ласка, багато українців зараз, Сполучені Штати сказали, нададуть притулок, якщо це потрібно.
And you keep the satellites of Eastern Europe. Yeah, there we are, Strobe Talbot and myself, 1991. Even someone as good as Gorbachev was saying, you know, you have to keep the republics, as he called them, part of the Soviet Union. Quick point.
Michael,
at the time, a lot of Eastern European countries were saying, we want to be part of NATO. Even Gorbachev was saying, no need, there will never be again a Stalin. He was wrong. That's what Putin is.
Well, indeed, and I have to note that you're looking quite young and fresh in that picture. Really great photo. Thank you for bringing that along with us.
I think. Thank you.
Looking good. Julia Ioffe, the problem with the calculus that Putin has created here is that Ukraine is a distinct country, and they don't want to be part of a new Soviet Union. They want nothing to do with it. And so he's finding greater resistance than he'd expected. And all he's doing is bolstering the desire of non-NATO countries to say, maybe we should join NATO. You know, I'm quite sure that the leadership in Ukraine wishes at this point that they had been in NATO, because it might have stopped this aggression against them.
I think there's a couple things going on here. First of all, you're completely right, and this has been going on since 2014, when Putin first invaded Ukraine. This is his second invasion, let's recall. He invaded Ukraine, annexed Crimea illegally, started this AstroTurf separatist war in the east, and before 2014, NATO was mostly tied up in Afghanistan. The only time Article 5 had ever been invoked was after 9/11. And NATO countries came to the aid of the U.S. And things with Putin weren't that bad between Putin and NATO. He even allowed a NATO transit point to open on Russian territory to allow NATO to open up basically an easier path for NATO to ship troops and material to Afghanistan. There were joint Russian-NATO exercises. There was constant dialogue. But and NATO kind of almost didn't have a point anymore. And then he invaded Ukraine, and suddenly NATO was again an anti-Russian organization. And so much of this is a crisis of his own making, that he invented in his paranoid mind, and then he's doing everything to make a reality. A friend of mine in Moscow pointed out that, you know, before 2014, and this is, everybody has observed this, but before 2014, Ukraine was kind of split. It was this seesaw between the Ukrainian-speaking West, which had a different kind of Christianity, in the East, where people were more likely to be Russian speakers and feel nostalgia for the Soviet Union. And the political system was kind of a seesaw. One presidential election would elect a like 1 year would be a pro-Russian leader, and next time would be a pro-Western leader, and it would just kind of go back and forth. And NATO membership wasn't even that popular until 2014. Now they want to join NATO. But the other problem is that in 2008, George W. Bush and Condoleezza Rice promised NATO membership eventually to Georgia and Ukraine. And there were many people, including the French and the Germans, as well as people inside the American government, who said this is not a good idea. This is going to infuriate Vladimir Putin, and it will have repercussions down the road. And George W. Bush kept pushing. And so we got the worst of both worlds. The U.S. Irritated Russia, provoked it, but then left these republics hanging without any of the protection that they promised them. So it's quite an awful, ironic crisis.
It definitely is. And Michael, you know, the irony is, you know, you have a sort of school of thought on the right that says, well, if the president was still named Trump and not Biden, this wouldn't be happening. But I'm old enough to remember that there have been published reports that what Trump would have done is taken us out of NATO. He actually wanted to destroy NATO. I mean, there was a, you know, here's from a book called I Alone Can Fix It. Trump had privately indicated that he would seek to withdraw from NATO should he win re-election, saying in a meeting, we'll do it in the second term. So NATO's survival would have been in even greater threat. And now it seems that NATO will get stronger because of what Putin is doing.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you know, the summer of 2016, Donald Trump is about to get nominated. What's the first thing he does? He tells the Republican Platform Committee, I want to change Republican policy on Ukraine. I don't want the United States anymore to take a position of defending Ukraine. I remember at the time thinking, where's this coming from? I mean, this is something that no one else is talking about. What's on his brain? And then he spends 4 years trying to dismantle NATO. It leads you to assume that in a Trump second term, this was exactly what was planned, which was that Putin would conquer Ukraine. But instead of the situation we've got now, which is Joe Biden doing everything he can short of war to stop it, instead you would have had an American president crossing his arms and essentially saying, go ahead, I hate NATO, I'm going to block it from doing anything.
Yeah, absolutely. It would have been full Neville Chamberlain time, which is, you know, it's why it helps to know the history. Exactly. Michael Beschloss, Julia Ioffe, thank you both very much. Still to come, history is made at the White House as President Biden nominates KETANJI Brown Jackson to the United States Supreme Court.
Especially when 3 months ago the French government was talking about strategic autonomy and was still reeling and upset about, you know, the AUKUS Defense Pact. The French have been more on board with the Americans than you might have expected, all things considered. But again, going back to your initial point, Jesse, it's not enough. And you know, I would go back to 1994. I'm sure you remember it, when we told the Ukrainians that if they gave up their nukes, the U.S., the U.K., and Russia said we'd defend their territorial integrity. The fact is that that was never implemented. You never put in place the possibility of doing that. And so the Ukrainians today are pretty angry.
Yeah. Bill Clinton, 94. Who could forget? That was about 14, but you know what I'm talking about. Ian Bremmer, thank you so much. Great stuff.
Good to see you, Jesse.
As the Russians close in on Kiev, residents are fleeing this besieged city. And scenes like this are breaking out at train stations. Watch. Whereas some Ukrainian guards there firing off blanks as warning shots just to try to do some crowd control, because you could see how chaotic that was. But as the fighting continues, are we going to see more scenes like this? Let's ask one of those Ukrainian residents fleeing the country, Uliana Berezenko, who looks like she might be driving her car. Are you okay? Looks like...
Hear me? Yes, everything okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. What's going on right now?
You know, now it's battle for Kiev, and this night it's very, very important for our country because the Russian troops, they circle the Kiev and they want, sorry, and they want to kill all citizens in the Kiev, all residents in the Kiev.
So you've left the city?
They're underground in the shop. Yes. No, I'm not in Kiev. Now, and I was part of Ukraine, but I ask all the world to help us.
What would you like to see done by the world?
I can't even imagine that I will be a refugee. And I want to say for all words that Russia is murder. And if you can stop them, they will come to your land, not only to Ukrainian land. And we really appreciate you say what you did for us, but we ask for you to close our sky, to help us with troops, to help us with weapons, to help us with military, to help us with medicine.
Well, the world's listening, and may God be with you. Stay safe, and we love you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And please pray for Ukraine and for Kiev now.
We will. All of us will be praying tonight. Thank you very much. President Zelensky says tonight is the night Russia will storm Kiev. Let's bring in Brett Baer to tell us more about what we can expect to see in the next coming hours. Brett.
Hey, Jesse, that interview is powerful as she's making her way. This is Kyiv here. Likely she's heading this way to Lviv as a lot of the folks are trying to get out to Poland. You know, we've been talking about these Russian forces as they're trying to get to Kyiv, and we saw Russian Marines land here at the port in Odessa. This force had been moving from Crimea. Then we had the Donbass forces. We had forces coming in this way, and then the forces from Belarus. We talked about Chernobyl yesterday. They secured that, and then they're making their way to the capital city. The real question here is how fast is that going to happen? This is Kyiv, and you can see this is the office of the president. We know he's in Kyiv somewhere. We don't know he's there, but he's somewhere. This is the Gostomel Air Base. There was a big fight yesterday with this. The Russians took it over. The Ukrainians took it back. The Russians are now in control of it. It's about 20 miles as the crow flies from downtown. Our guys in that hotel, as they look north, it's the Obolon district, and there's a lot of fighting right in this area. As you look at how the Russians are getting the support, they have a lot of bases. One is in Belarus. The other one is in Belgorod, and we've been looking on the satellite at this base. It's massive. Attack helicopters, military trucks, a field hospital, tents. Just yesterday, this is from yesterday, 18 attack helicopters in this one base just over the border. So the question is, how long does that take? All these red dots are airstrikes or fires. There's a lot of pushback by the Ukrainians, but the Russians are going to make their way to Kyiv at some point, and it might be tonight, and it could get ugly, Jesse.
So keep that map up for 1 second, Brett. It's interesting if you can just see that this was probably in the making for many, many years. If you go in and seize the eastern provinces, then you have that push directly from east to west, and then you have Crimea, so that takes care of the naval asset, and you go south to north, and then you have your puppet in Belarus, which brings the hammer down hard from north to south. It's just amazing to think that he telegraphed this thing geographically for years and years and years. We all saw it coming, and all we have left is sanctions.
What's amazing is that he has 190,000 roughly around Belarus and all around here on the outskirts. But we estimate, the military does, that only about 60,000, 70,000 Russian troops are inside the country currently. And he hasn't really dropped the hammer on the airstrikes as of yet. There's been a lot of them. There's been more than 200. But there's still a lot of pushback from the Ukrainians, and the Russians are taking losses. So how the Ukrainians fight, and if this becomes an insurgency, this could be really messy for the Russians and for Putin in the long haul.
A moment that we should all be celebrated. It was an opportunity for Americans to see the countless qualified and overqualified Black women who could have also been successful nominees. And beyond the historic nature of this nomination is the fact that Judge Jackson is supremely qualified in every way. And she brings much needed professional diversity, racial diversity, increased gender diversity on the court. And her nomination and ultimate appointment could not be more timely. We are facing so many critical issues as a nation.
Yeah, no, I saw a tweet today by an attorney who said, you know, she's got all the qualifications of John Roberts when he was nominated, plus 7 more years on the bench. So she's obviously beyond qualified for this job. I feel like there's something resonant about the fact that, you know, while it will still be a 6-3 far right-wing majority court, the 3 will include a Jewish woman, a Latina, and a Black woman, which is so kind of resonant to me about the, you know, the emerging majority in the country and about the emerging multiracial democracy that we live in. That, to me, is pretty resonant. But what about you?
Well, it resonates with me, too, and I think it will resonate with most residents of this country. It is a microcosm of the imbalance of power that still exists in this country, with a growing, emerging Browning electorate, with women who are taking increasingly higher posts and positions of leadership in this country, and who should be having a say in making the determinations that will govern our lives. To have 3 women, 2 women of color, 1 Latina, 1 Black woman on the court, it's just an incredible testament to what this country can produce when we take courageous steps, when we hold to our convictions and values, and live up to the commitment of diversity. And we leverage the diversity of this country, which is our greatest strength. So I have no doubt that with this addition to the court, that court will be deciding issues in a different way, with a different lens and perspective.
You know there's going to be a fight because Republicans have already started caterwauling about this incredibly qualified nominee. But several Republicans, we'll put them up on the screen, you know, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, Lindsey Graham, they voted for Judge Jackson before. They voted to confirm her before. They're not standing by that they will do that again. What do you expect this fight to look like over the nomination? And do you think, I mean, well, do you anticipate it being a fight?
Well, listen, I don't think there's a Black woman in America who has achieved the status that Judge Jackson has without a fight and without being able to fight for herself and for her dignity and her rightful place as a leader in this nation. I do hope that this Senate will be respectful, will honor its constitutional mandate to advise and consent. And when you have a Supreme Court nominee as qualified as Judge Jackson, there really shouldn't be a fight. But of course, we're ready for potential pushback, and we know that this is a highly politicized process, so we're not being naive about some of the missives that may come her way. But she is basically like Teflon if you think about the credentials that she brings to the court.
And I thought she was really smart to talk about, you know, she has an uncle that was in the criminal justice system, but she also has, you know, brothers that were, you know, in law enforcement. She's got a family history in law enforcement as well. She put all that out there. I thought it was really brilliant. Her speech today was fantastic. I wanted to make a quick turn here because today is also the 10-year anniversary of the murder of Trayvon Martin. It was one of the earliest cases that I covered as a journalist, and it still sticks with me. He still sticks with me. Tomorrow is the anniversary, sorry. What do you think that case in which the shooter was acquitted, where are we in terms of this search for equal justice for people of color when faced with gun violence, whether it's police-induced or not?
We are too far away from where we should be. Trayvon Martin, a young black man, a promising adolescent, lost his life 10 years ago because of a wannabe law enforcement vigilante who was protected by stand your ground laws that don't apply equally depending on the color of your skin. And I think it is important that we revisit those laws. We've seen numerous cases since then that have continued to perpetuate the discrimination in applying stand your ground laws. All of us should be protected to freely walk through our residential areas, through public spaces, and even through private spaces without the threat of potential fatality. So it is a sad remembrance.
It's a sad anniversary for sure, and much love to his family, his parents, and his brother. Janae Nelson, thank you very much for being here. Up next, national
invasion. And that is the News Hour for tonight. I'm Judy Woodruff. Join us online and again here on Monday evening. For all of us at the PBS News Hour, thank you. Please stay safe and have a good weekend.
Major funding for the PBS News Hour has been provided by
rumblings in the area right behind me. Obolon is a suburb of Kiev where we know there are concentrations of Russian armor and forces. There's also that military air base that has been taken by Russian special forces. And the expectation still tonight, Erin, is that there will be a push either tonight or within the next several hours or the next several days on this city of Kiev, and the population and the authorities here are bracing for it, Erin.
Matthew, thank you very much. And next, they said we will never leave Ukraine. Love for their cats, keeping one couple in this country willing to be in harm's way.
Dakota News Now at 9 on Fox Sioux Falls.
Sven Gulli and Wonder Woman here on our way to Super Sci-Fi Saturday night on MeTV. Look, it's the Jupiter 2. I wonder if they can see us.
We picked you up on the monitor. Can you hear me? You're moving past our monitor radius.
Oh, and there's Buck Rogers. Hi, Buck.
Well, hello there.
Hey, here comes the Starship Enterprise.
Sir, contact with an object. It's moving toward us. It's coming at light speed.
Nice invisible plane.
Right here on MeTV, Sioux Falls 13.3.
Late Night Laughs is your source.
Want more wheel?
Just got to have an infection or symptoms, or if you had a vaccine or plan to.
Emerge Tremfiant.
Inside.
Enthusiastically, hailing her exemplary legal career in both public and private practice. And he went on to say, her careful approach as a trial court judge. Judge Jackson's service on the District Circuit Court the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals is another superb qualification for service on the Supreme Court. 3 of the current Supreme Court justices also served as the D.C. Circuit judges, where Judge Jackson now serves. Her opinions are always carefully reasoned, tethered to precedent, and demonstrate respect for how the law impacts everyday people. It doesn't mean she puts her thumb on the scale of justice one way or the other, but she understands the broader impact of her decisions. Whether it's cases addressing the rights of workers or government service, she cares about making sure that our democracy works for the American people. She listens. She looks people in the eye, lawyers, defendants, victims, and families. And she strives to ensure that everyone understands why she made a decision, what the law is, and what it means to them. She strives to be fair, to get it right, to do justice. That's something all of us should remember, and it's something I've thought about throughout this process. And as a matter of fact, I thought about it walking over here with her. 1 floor below, we have several displays celebrating Black History Month. One of them includes the judicial oath of office taken and signed by Justice Thurgood Marshall himself, an oath that will be once again administered to a distinguished American who will help write the next chapter in the history of the journey of America, a journey that Judge Jackson will take with her family. I hope I don't embarrass him, but her husband, Patrick, a surgeon, doctor. Patrick, stand up, let him see who you are. There you go. They met when they were undergraduate students at Harvard, and he's a distinguished cancer surgeon at Georgetown. And like so many women in this country, Judge Jackson is a working mom. She had her eldest child, Talia, when she was a private lawyer in practice. She had her second child, Layla, when she served as on the U.S. Sentencing Commission. Stand up, Layla. I asked Layla when I showed her through the office whether she'd like to be president. She's like, no. There's other things. Anyway, Layla, you're welcome to be here. Thank you so much. And welcome your sister who's up in school in Rhode Island now. I have children and grandchildren, and let me tell you, Judge, you're always a mom. That's not going to change no matter what you're doing. Whether you're on the Supreme Court or not. And I've always had a deep respect for the Supreme Court and judiciary as a co-equal branch of the government. I mean it. The court is equally as important as the presidency or the Congress. It's co-equal. So today, I'm pleased to nominate Judge Jackson, who will bring extraordinary qualifications, deep experience and intellect, and a rigorous judicial record to the court. Judge Jackson deserves to be confirmed as the next Justice of the Supreme Court. I've met with the chairman and ranking members of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Senator Dick Durbin, Senator Chuck Grassley, and my hope is that they will move promptly, and I know they'll move fairly. Judge Jackson, congratulations, and the podium is yours. Let me pull this out for you. There you go. You got it? But okay. See, presidents can't do much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I am truly humbled by the extraordinary honor of this nomination, and I am especially grateful for the care that you have taken in discharging your constitutional duty in service of our democracy with all that is going on in the world today. I also offer my sincerest thanks to you as well, Madam Vice President, for your invaluable role in this nomination process. I must begin these very brief remarks by thanking God for delivering me to this point in my professional journey. My life has been blessed beyond measure, and I do know that one can only come this far by faith. Among my many blessings, and indeed the very first, is the fact that I was born in this great country. The United States of America is the greatest beacon of hope and democracy the world has ever known. I was also blessed from my early days to have had a supportive and loving family. My mother and father, who have been married for 54 years, are at their home in Florida right now, and I know that they could not be more proud. It was my father who started me on this path when I was a child, as the president mentioned. My father made the fateful decision to transition from his job as a public high school history teacher and go to law school. Some of my earliest memories are of him sitting at the kitchen table, reading his law books. I watched him study, and he became my first professional role model. My mother, who was also a public high school teacher, provided invaluable support in those early days, working full-time to enable my father's career transition while also guiding and inspiring 4-year-old me. My only sibling, my brother KETANJI, came along half a decade later, and I'm so proud of all that he's accomplished. After graduating from Howard University, he became a police officer and a detective on some of the toughest streets in the inner city of Baltimore. After that, he enlisted in the Army, serving 2 tours of duty in the Middle East. I believe that he was following the example set by my uncles who are in law enforcement. You may have read that I have one uncle who got caught up in the drug trade and received a life sentence. That is true. But law enforcement also runs in my family. In addition to my brother, I had 2 uncles who served decades as police officers, one of whom became the police chief in my hometown of Miami, Florida. I am standing here today by the grace of God as testament to the love and support that I've received from my family. I have also been blessed with many dear friends, colleagues, mentors, law clerks. I could not possibly name all of the people to whom I owe great thanks. But I must mention specifically the 3 brilliant jurists for whom I had the privilege of serving as a law clerk at the outset of my legal career. U.S. District Judge Patty Saris in Massachusetts, U.S. Court of Appeals Judge Bruce Selya in Rhode Island, and last but certainly not least, Associate Justice Stephen Breyer of the Supreme Court of the United States. Justice Breyer, in particular.
CNN's Oren Lieberman reporting. Let's go to our correspondents in the field, starting with CNN Chief International Correspondent Clarissa Ward in Kyiv. So, Clarissa, there are reports of heavy fighting in the outskirts of Kyiv. What can you confirm? What are you hearing and seeing?
So, Anderson, you won't be able to hear it on the camera mic because it's too far away, but we're hearing a lot of heavy fighting coming from that direction. That is where 4 miles in that direction is the suburb of Obolon, where there has been heavy fighting throughout the day, and we're really hearing just a steady rumble of strikes and artillery. The Ukrainian military is also claiming that they have shot down a Russian transport plane. CNN has not been able to independently confirm that at all. But it is clear that the Ukrainians are putting up quite a fight, Anderson.
These sanctions was to deter the invasion of Ukraine. So at the very least, acknowledge they didn't work as intended.
Off of our balcony because this entire city of Dnipro is under lockdown and it's on a blackout. So now we're inside the hotel room and that's why it's so dark. This is going to be a long night for everybody, a dark night, just as you're seeing here. Every city in this country is imposing this kind of rule because they're trying to avoid airstrikes. And they don't want to, create a target for people. And we've heard this over and over again. Every citizen is taking to the streets, taking to the barricades. They're giving guns out to anybody who's willing to fight. And President Zelensky, he gave a rousing speech tonight in which he said, among other things, that this night will be very tough, very dark. Sun will rise. Glory to Ukraine. And this is, it sounds dramatic because it is dramatic and because he believes that the Russians are going to be moving in, finally, just tonight, to take the capital, Kyiv. It's also dramatic because, remember, Zelensky was an actor just right up to the day that he became president. But, this is a real issue for this country, the sense that it's not just volunteers. It's not just giving guns to people. You were talking about how people between the ages of 18 and 60 can't leave the country. They're also being forcibly conscripted. So if you're caught in the street, and we had this issue today, if you're seen walking around, they can press gang you into joining the military, bring you to defend the country if you're a fighting age male. And this is something.
We are allowing others to take the lead on a very serious situation, which will impact our pocketbooks and, of course, create insecurity for the people not only in Europe, but right here in the United States of America as well.
Yeah, we were talking about how earlier, I don't know if you heard.
And the second gentleman, that seems strange to say that, but the second, Douglas Emhoff, they're both here as well. So thank you. Thank you all.
Following the president's announcement, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer weighed in on Judge Brown Jackson's nomination and the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Is that all right? Okay, good afternoon, everyone. So I am excited about the president's pick for the Supreme Court. With her exceptional qualifications, a record of even-handedness. With her exceptional qualifications and a record of even-handedness, Judge KETANJI Brown Jackson will be a justice who will uphold the Constitution, protect the rights of all Americans, including the voiceless and the vulnerable. She's a true public servant and a model jurist. Judge Jackson has demonstrated a commitment repeatedly to America's foundational principles of freedom, equality, and rule of law. As a clerk for Justice Stephen Breyer, an assistant federal public defender, a federal district court judge, and most recently as a judge on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit, Judge Jackson has shown brilliance, thoughtfulness, a willingness to collaborate, and a dedication to applying the law impartially. This historic nomination of Judge Jackson is an important step towards ensuring that the Supreme Court reflects the nation as a whole. As the first black woman Supreme Court justice in the court's 232-year history, she's going to inspire countless future generations of young Americans. Senate Democrats have spent the past year working with President Biden to shape a federal judicial system that fully represents America. And we will continue that trend by confirming Judge Jackson to the Supreme Court. I commend President Biden on undertaking a thoughtful, deliberate selection process for the next Supreme Court justice. Now, on the timing. Once the president
powerful as Putin is. And so this is significant. No one thinks that Putin has a lot of money in the United States that's going to be frozen as a result of these sanctions, but it is notable that they did take this step today, which we should note came after yesterday. President Biden and I had talked about this at his press conference. He said it was still an option that was on the table, but it was not one that they had took initially yesterday in light of this invasion starting in Ukraine. However, in the last 24 hours or so, he talked to European allies. The European Union went first with these sanctions on not only Putin, but also the Russian foreign minister, the top diplomat, Sergei Lavrov as well. And then now the United States and Canada as well are following tonight, sanctioning Putin himself, sanctioning Lavrov himself. And it is a notable step coming from the White House because it's really sending a message to Putin, I think. It's not going to change a ton, though there are travel restrictions as a part of this that will apply to Putin, that will apply to Lavrov, who we do often see meeting with U.S. officials when those meetings were actually going forward. But Anderson, it does stand out that they are taking this step tonight, trying to call out Putin on the stage in a sense that they were not prepared to do even just yesterday.
I just want to quickly check in, Clarissa, while Caitlin was talking, I just saw you looking around. Is there anything else going on?
No, we just heard those couple of loud explosions, and still we're hearing a steady rumble. It sounds like there's some pretty heavy fighting going on. I'm guessing it's in this suburb of Obolon. It's just about 4 miles from where we are, but you can imagine that people can start to feel now this sort of noose tightening as Russian forces get closer and closer to the center of the capital, Anderson.
And Russian forces are coming from various directions. I mean, it's obviously there's Russian forces in Belarus, there's Russian forces on the eastern borders and in the south.
Yeah, they're coming from at least 3 different directions at the moment, and they've only moved in a third of the forces that they have at their disposal. You remember there's something like 170,000 of them who are massing on that border. It may well be that the attack on Kiev does not happen tonight, or the full-fledged assault, the storming, as President Volodymyr Zelensky warned about it, that they may be waiting for more of those reinforcements to come in as backup. But certainly the tone that you heard from President Zelensky in that address, Anderson, I mean, it was markedly different than anything we've heard from him before. This is the man who a week ago was saying, keep calm and carry on. There's never going to be a full-scale invasion, and we just don't see the intelligence in the same way that the U.S. does. Now saying it looks like it's going to happen tonight, and we are going to do everything we can to defend our country to stop the slaughter, Anderson.
Yeah, I mean, Clarissa, when you're telling the citizens to make Molotov cocktails in your apartment flats, I mean, that says a lot about what you're expecting and what kind of defenses you have and don't have.
Right. I don't know if you heard that. There was another loud blast there.
Yeah, we could hear that.
Tens of thousands of people, Anderson, and another one, are lining up to volunteer in any way that they can. They're giving out weapons to people. They're telling people, exactly as you just mentioned, to learn how to make Molotov cocktails. In Obolon, that area where I think the fighting is hardest this evening, they were telling people, don't leave your houses, just make Molotov cocktails and throw them out the window. So they're really resorting to a number of different measures, anything they can to try to gain succor and provide some resistance to this onslaught, Anderson.
Well, also, I mean, the importance of the video you showed that you got along the highway, the air superiority, as you point out, allows Russian forces to, you know, at will destroy any kind of column of troops that they want. So any kind of resistance ultimately would have to be much smaller units, much more sort of insurgency style.
Well, and that's what a lot of people are talking about, that, you know, U.S. predicts that within days Kyiv could fall. But I can tell you just from conversations I've had with people here on the ground in the city, and frankly all around Ukraine, that if there is any kind of protracted Russian occupation, which President Putin has said there won't be, but it's difficult to see how that would be possible, people will rise up in whatever small way they can, whether it's, you know, tossing a Molotov cocktail out of a window or, you know, approaching a group of Russian soldiers with an AK. I can guarantee you they will have a fight on their hands. And the worry there is that that could very quickly get very ugly and could leave civilians particularly vulnerable, Anderson.
Yeah. Jill Doherty, as we continue to monitor what's going on in Kyiv.
There is some significant fighting around the Ukrainian capital, as reports indicate, and President Zelensky of Ukraine himself said this could be the major push into this capital city. It's not just here in Kyiv, though, that we're seeing this fighting, though, across Ukraine. I want to show you some video here of a fire earlier today in Chernihiv, a Ukrainian city where a security service building was hit by a Russian strike. Similar scenes across this country as the Russian invasion continues. The new numbers that we are getting indicate only a third of the Russian forces, nearly 200,000 that were staging along the Ukrainian border, have actually entered this country and started to participate in the invasion. We know Belarus is also being used as a staging ground for these Russian forces. New Maxar technology satellite images today show attack helicopters that are lined up less than 20 miles from the Ukrainian border. Just yesterday, there was some fierce fighting outside of Kyiv where there were basically a firefight of forces going back and forth trying to maintain control of an airport that experts worry could be used by the Russians to bring in more supplies and troops as they do try to make their way to the capital. But again, tonight, the latest, Tucker, is there is fighting outside of the capital city right now. And Ukrainian officials have told us they believe there are Russian forces within the city limits at this hour. Tucker?
Holy smokes. What a story. Trey, thanks so much for that update. Appreciate it.
Sure.
So Joe Biden has a Supreme Court vacancy to fill. Now imagine if it had unfolded this way. If Joe Biden had said, look, this is the most serious appointed position in the U.S. government. It's obviously someone who's going to define life in this country to some great extent. And so we're going to pick someone who's the smartest we can find, who's the most deeply grounded in the founding documents, the Constitution, Bill of Rights, and someone who has impressive character. And that person is an African-American woman. And most people in this country say, great. He went about it backward. He said, I'm picking an African-American woman. I'm picking someone on the basis of their appearance for the most serious appointment I have. Now, maybe she's great. That's not the point. The point is she was picked because of how she looks. So what does that tell you, not about the nominee, but about Joe Biden? It tells you that he is absolutely happy to defile a system built by other people over hundreds of years that is the best system in the history of the world, and he's happy to destroy it. Doesn't care.
Your face, mouth, and tongue, or trouble breathing.
Voters think it is, quote, inappropriate for the president to consider only African-American women for his first nomination to the Supreme Court. Well, of course it is, or any group, because it's not about the group, it's not about what color or what gender, it's about choosing by appearance, which are relevant criteria for this or any other job except perhaps modeling.
Studying this, does the court really change when Judge Jackson then becomes Justice Jackson?
Well, you know, this change is going to be less than others because it is one liberal justice leaving and, another liberal justice, assuming that they can get one confirmed, whether it's KETANJI Brown Jackson or somebody else. And that's, I think, why the left was so upset about Justice Ginsburg leaving the seat to a conservative. So do I see a lot of change? People liked Justice Breyer. He provided some entertainment. He asked these very long-winded, sort of funny questions, and there will be a debate later. But certainly, I think we know where the votes are going to be here.
Yeah, no, it seems that way. One of the swing votes in this, interestingly enough, was Lindsey Graham, one of the more conservative members of the Senate, but on judiciary and sort of seen as this believer in, Ian, what you said was a long-lost art of this nonpartisan court. This is what he wrote. The radical left has won President Biden over yet again. I expect a respectful but interesting hearing. The Harvard-Yale train to the Supreme Court continues to run unabated. He had widely been seen as, at least behind the scenes, pushing for J. Michelle Childs, who would have been the first Supreme Court justice, not only who was an African-American woman, but who didn't go to either Harvard or Yale in something like 60 years. Are we going to ever get a normal person who isn't as smart as the two of you on the Supreme Court?
Well, listen. Remember, Amy Coney Barrett did go to Notre Dame, so that was,
it broke the Ivy lock, but
it broke the Ivy lock, and of course, Justice Ginsburg technically graduated from Columbia. Technically, and Princeton doesn't have a law school. So I think that, I thought Judge Childs had a reasonable chance of being nominated, in part because of her connection to Lindsey Graham. But the truth is, it's not just that Judge Jackson went to Harvard for undergraduate and Harvard for law school. She was a law clerk for Justice Breyer. And you know who else? The Chief Justice of the United States was a law clerk for the previous Chief Justice of the United States. Justice Kagan was a law clerk on the Supreme Court. Justice Breyer was a law clerk on the Supreme Court. Actually, come to think of it, we have two former law clerks for Justice Kennedy on the Supreme Court and a former law clerk for Justice Scalia. This is an aristocracy, okay?
Yeah, that's a great word for it.
Navalny says is close to Putin. Today, Abramovich's daughter, Sophia, posted this anti-war message on her Instagram story, calling popular Russian support for the war merely Kremlin propaganda. Even more striking is the daughter of Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin spokesman, who also took to Instagram and posted the words, "No war," over a black screen. In Russia, this kind of speech isn't merely controversial, it is criminal. You go to jail, or worse, for these kinds of messages. And yet, the resistance continues. I want to turn now to someone who's been reporting on Russia for years. Michael Weiss is the Director of Special Investigations at the Free Russia Foundation. He is also the news director of New Lines magazine and is currently writing a book about Russia's intelligence agency. Michael, thanks for being here. I mean, I think for a lot of us who are told that Russia has a firm control over its citizens through misinformation in the state media, it's surprising to see a certain generation of Russians voicing their opposition so clearly. Are you surprised by it? Do you feel like it's indicative of Putin going too far with Russians this time, that they're on to him, if you will?
I wouldn't use the word surprised. I'm deeply impressed by it. But look, one of the things that's been most striking about this war, it's a war that a lot of Russians thought could never in a million years happen because of the immediate disastrous consequences that would come down on Putin and his regime for it. This is not like any other campaign Putin has fought. It's not like Chechnya, where he could claim that this was a counterterrorism campaign, which resonated with a lot of Russians who felt that they were attacked by suicide bombers and so-called black widows and so on. It's not like Syria, where again he claimed he was fighting a war on terror. This is a war against what he himself, in a 7,000-word chauvinistic revisionist screed, described as our people. He has characterized Ukrainians as essentially indistinguishable from Russians, which will come as a great deal of a surprise to most Ukrainians who now absolutely align themselves with Europe and the West. I mean, it has been extraordinary, too, just to get to the point of Ukrainian resistance. We're not just talking about military resistance, and I'm happy to talk to you about some of those dynamics, but the sense of resolve and resiliency in this people. I've been traveling to Ukraine for 8 years, at least once or twice a year, and each time I've gone, I have seen a sense of peoplehood, an increase in pride for cultural patrimony, a real deep connection with Ukraine's distinct history only kind of skyrocket. And they have cast their lot with Europe and the West. And what you're seeing now essentially is a former Soviet state acting in a way that is more Western than, frankly, a lot of Western European countries. They are describing this, they have couched this as the fate of not just democracy in their own country, but for the world. And it should be inspiring to a lot of people.
I think it is inspiring to a lot of people. I do wonder, though, about Putin's domestic pushback, the fact that they're arresting hundreds of people in Russia, that younger Russians, daughters of some of Putin's cronies, are out there on Instagram, basically, you know, calling his number. Does that surprise you?
Well, it does a bit, but if I may be just a little bit cynical. So one of the things that the U.S. and the European Union has wisely done is not just go after Putin's inner circle, his elites, his so-called siloviki, the security hawks who essentially orchestrated this war. They're also going after their children. Now, in the West, we might take offense at this and say that seems a little bit indiscriminate and needless. But in Russia, the kids of these people are often in C-suites of state-owned companies, and they are what's known as wallets for their parents' ill-gotten wealth, wealth that, frankly, has been stolen from the Russian people. So when I see the daughters or the children of oligarchs who, frankly, could be on the chopping block in terms of sanctions, tweet this stuff out or post this on social media, it makes me wonder a little bit about if they're not worried about themselves being sanctioned down the pipe. But look, there is no arguing with the fact that there is a great deal of discontent and revulsion among Russians who, frankly, did not want this war. And by the way the war was sold to them up until very recently is interesting. Putin and his state media apparatus did not describe this as a war against Ukraine and Ukrainians. He has couched this as a war against NATO and the United States, a confrontation with the West. And he did that because he knew it was going to be a hard sell to say we're invading Ukraine. And by the way, the propaganda that's been carted out in the last 72, 92 hours is risible. It is scenery collapsingly ridiculous. This is a Nazi junta, he's described it. He is waging a war of denazification against a country with a Jewish president and a Jewish defense minister, and up until not too long ago, a Jewish prime minister. This is the world's strangest Nazi junta. I've seen rabbis tweet solidarity with Volodymyr Zelensky. The Jewish community of Odessa, the home of Isaac Babel and Leon Trotsky, no less, is saying that they're evacuating. And they're not evacuating because of roving neo-Nazis in Ukraine. They're evacuating from this advertised anti-fascist military that's been sent to, quote, emancipate them. So Putin he's out of things to sell. He has lost the West. He is increasingly isolated. You've seen today at the UN Security Council, his closest global partner, China, abstained from a resolution condemning this and calling for immediate ceasefire. He has painted himself into a corner. And one of the things that we all have to reckon with now and wonder, and again, this is not my own opinion, I've seen Russia watchers who for years have been telling me how stable and secure this regime is. We have to wonder at just how secure it is going to be in the long term. I'm hearing people who up until a week ago would never have done these things now whisper to me about palace coups or military coups. So again, I think he has fashioned a rod for his own back, and whether in the short or mid-term, this is going to really blow back in his face.
Dot clears a lot sales event. Billion Kia will match.
During World War I, he said he was avenging the Treaty of Versailles. He came to power to begin his rampage through Europe to avenge the embarrassment of Versailles. Putin came to power and continues to take over his neighbors to avenge the end of the Cold War and breakup of the Soviet Union. He talks about bringing back Mother Russia. All right. Hitler said he wanted to unite the greater ethnic Germany. We saw what he took over in the Third Reich. Putin wants to reunite the greater ethnic Russian, the greater Soviet Union. This was the Soviet Union before. You have to think about their justifications for invasion. Hitler's justification for invading Czechoslovakia in 1938, he invaded to protect German speakers. Vladimir Putin, in 2014, he said he was invading Ukraine, Crimea and eastern Ukraine, to protect Russian speakers. Hitler had Japan's emperor as his friend and ally. Vladimir Putin has Xi Jinping of China. This is where we find a scary similarity in talking points that's happening in politics in America right now. Talking points of American isolationists are the same in 1940 as they are in 2022. Summed up best by America First spokesman Charles Lindbergh in 1940. The doctrine that we must enter the wars of Europe in order to defend America will be fatal to our nation if we follow it. We must turn our eyes and our faith back to our own country before it's too late. And now for the next quote. Tulsi Gabbard. This war and suffering could have easily been avoided if Biden administration had simply acknowledged Russia's legitimate security concerns. Josh Hawley, Republican senator from Missouri, sending new troops, expanding the security commitment, and expanding NATO. I just think that is a strategic mistake. There is one difference. Vladimir Putin has nuclear weapons, lots of them. And we already heard from a former Lieutenant General and Assistant Secretary of Defense that he is worried that Putin, once cornered, or if cornered in Ukraine, will actually use his tactical nuclear weapons. Vladimir Putin is getting desperate. Here is the president of Ukraine. No, we don't have the president of Ukraine. That was missing. We do have, however, Congressman Michael Waltz, former Green Beret, congressman and advisor to then Vice President Dick Cheney. Congressman, good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you, Leland.
Are we clear-eyed enough in who Vladimir Putin is and his intentions?
Well, you know, the real irony in what you just laid out there is actually Putin and his oligarchs, when they're justifying their aggressiveness, usually in their propaganda, use the term fascism, Nazism, to describe, in this case, Zelensky's government. And that it was, you know, the reimposition of Nazism and fascism that was abusing, and they even used the term genocide on ethnic Russians in Ukraine to justify it. You're going to see that justification over and over again. I fear after Ukraine, you're going to see it for the ethnic pockets that are in Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia.
So much of what's happening right now in Ukraine could, in the words, get out of control very quickly. It would happen, of course, if Vladimir Putin went into Latvia or Estonia or anywhere else that NATO has land. We're on with Article 5. What do you make? What do you make of how valiantly the Ukrainians are fighting and how much better, for lack of a better term, they are doing against the Russian army?
Yeah, I was just out there in Kyiv and visited the Ukrainian Special Operations Command and a number of the ministries. And I have to tell you, they were ready to fight. It was clear then that they were gearing up for what they knew would be literally the fight of their lives. I think that Putin has underestimated the level of nationalism that has crept into the Ukrainian society and their military since the invasion of Crimea and the Donbass in 2014. I think in many ways, Putin assumed this would be like Crimea, particularly in the eastern parts of Ukraine, where you have much more ethnic Russians. You have to understand, the farther west you go towards Poland, the more Ukrainian nationalism and ethnicity that you get, but the farther east towards Russia, I think he assumed east of the Dnieper River that runs through north to south through the center of the country, that it would fold pretty easily, and it's not.
Yeah, when I was in the
bought into these false hopes sold by people like David Frum, and it's getting them killed. And of course, like you pointed out, David Frum insists that anybody who disagrees with the establishment's pro-war consensus is actually a Nazi. He tweeted that and then he deleted it.
Yeah.
But you'll never find Frum on the front lines of combat because, like many war hawks at National Review, the Bulwark, and elsewhere, David Frum is a coward. And I would be happy to buy him a ticket to Ukraine and put a rifle in his hands. But I think Frum is just...
were men going to recruiting centers to pick up automatic rifles. I visited 3 myself, and you saw these centers teeming over with men willing to fight for their country. There is just a major, overwhelming number of people going to fight. It was an incredible sight to see. Men in jumpsuits, men in sneakers with these automatic rifles. You also saw a mass exodus outside of the city. Long queues at gas stations, long queues at grocery stores, food in short supply at grocery stores. you also struggle to get money out of ATM machines. And so you saw people with roller luggage trying to find a way out. People were on the sides of the road trying to hitchhike outside of the city. So it was a very surreal sight. But the main thing were all these men of all ages. Some look like children fresh out of high school. Some in their 50s, all ready to fight for Ukraine.
And what about food, things like gasoline, water supplies? What is it like for civilians? Is it still okay?
Yeah, generally speaking, if you just know where to go, so if you can go to a little kiosk outside your store, it's normal. It also depends on where you are in the city. But it's there, but you just have to know where to go. And the lines are long if you are willing to wait. It's not like there's just shortages to the point where people are starving. It's not that bad, but you do have to know where to go. Another thing is that the city is so empty that in some respects, if you go to the right neighborhood, you won't find any lines at all. But some neighborhoods, they are quite long.
Charles Starr, I really appreciate the work you're doing and appreciate you talking to us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Be careful. More new sanctions announced today. As we mentioned, some aimed at Vladimir Putin. While they help isolate Putin on the world stage, there's still, of course, the question of what kind of an actual impact they would have. I'm joined now by Democratic Congressman Jason Crow, former Army Ranger who served in Afghanistan and Iraq, and who serves on both the Armed Services and Intelligence Committees. Last week, he met with Ukrainian officials at the Munich Security Conference, led a congressional delegation to Ukraine in December. Congressman, I'm wondering what you make of what you have seen so far from Russian forces on the ground in Ukraine.
Hi, Anderson. Well, I've been impressed by the resolve and the will to fight by the Ukrainians. Certainly, it was something that I've heard repeatedly over the last couple of months. I led a congressional delegation to Ukraine in December. I've had a lot of meetings with Ukrainian leadership, including most recently last week met personally with the mayor of Kyiv, who is now on the front lines fighting himself. What has become very clear to me is that these are people with a will to fight. They know they are fighting for their survival. They know they are fighting for their freedom. And that's a very dangerous thing for Vladimir Putin. I think he has miscalculated this. I think he was thinking that he could do this quickly, that their will to fight would collapse. And that's certainly not happening at this point.
It was interesting talking just now to General McCurtling, who was talking about the difficulty Russian forces will face. Say they take Kyiv and a number, and Kharkiv in the east, which is the second largest city of 1.5 million people. But occupying those cities, putting in a puppet government, all of that requires a lot of troops, probably even more troops than they have.
Yeah, that's right, Anderson. When I was a paratrooper of the 82nd Airborne Division during the invasion of Iraq. And I remember going into the very densely packed cities of Baghdad and Asamwa and Diwania and Ramadi. And it is unbelievable when you have a dense urban area, how that soaks up infantry forces. Now, we look at that 200,000 number, the 200,000 Russian troops. That's the full complement of troops. Only a fraction of those are infantry. Those are infantry soldiers that have to go in and occupy massive cities. And those cities will soak up those troops. And you add on top of that, as we're sitting here right now, you have tens of thousands of Kyiv residents and residents from cities across Ukraine who are loading their Kalashnikov rifles, who are sitting there with their families, making Molotov cocktails at their kitchen tables. Those Russian soldiers are in for a very rude awakening in the days and weeks ahead, I believe.
The Russian way, though, of waging war, I mean, you see what they did in Chechnya. It's a very different kind of, it's a far more brutal way even than a lot of, certainly than U.S. forces trying to, operate in a city. They don't have quite the same rules.
Yeah, it is brutal, but, when you're going up against a guerrilla guerrilla-style warfare, which is this is soon to be. Let's not forget that the Russian forces are probably at the height of their advantage right now, a conventional versus conventional fight. As this changes to a guerrilla-style fight, and you have civilians and others who are running around with Kalashnikov rifles shooting at Russian soldiers, the advantage of military units greatly erode. And if the instinct of those units, those conventional units, those Russian units, is to become more brutal and to crack down, what happens is the civilian populations resist even more fiercely as a result of that. It is an opposite reaction. So that really works to their disadvantage to do that. And frankly, that is going to be Putin's instinct.
Congressman Jason Crow, I appreciate your time tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ahead, a look at the intense fighting also occurring tonight in the south of the country, where both sides have fought to hold a key bridge. We have a live report from Kherson next.
Aw, let's get you lovebirds flying. Book with Priceline and you save more, so you can more. Ah. I'll see you at the hotel. Priceline. Every trip is a...
Russian helicopters attacking an airport near the capital, Kyiv. Russian troops seizing the Chernobyl nuclear plant. Explosions and sirens across the country. Reports that dozens are dead, including civilians. Our team there on the ground tonight. We're also seeing the massive traffic jams as thousands flee Kyiv. And inside a subway station where crowds are taking shelter from the bombs. President Biden addressing the nation today, saying Putin is the aggressor. Putin chose this war, and now he and his country will bear the consequences, he said. The new sanctions he announced against Russia as he deploys thousands more troops to Europe. In just a few moments, my one-on-one with Secretary of State Antony Blinken. I ask him, what does the U.S. hope these sanctions will achieve? Also tonight, the trial of the 3 former officers charged with violating George Floyd's civil rights. The verdict just handed down. And the deadly storm on the move, more than 100 million under alerts from Texas to Maine. Al Roker timing it out.
This is NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt.
Good evening. The world looks very different from when we joined you last night. As we come on the air, a second evening of Russian attacks is underway in Ukraine, a country of 40 million people under siege as the largest European invasion since World War II plays out. The sanctions failing to deter Vladimir Putin. President Biden unveiling a new round, but the die has been cast. Russian forces are on the move. The U.S. estimates Russia has already fired more than 160 missiles from land, sea, and air. The attack striking largely military targets across a vast part of Ukraine. Ukraine's Ministry of Health reporting dozens dead, many more injured, including civilians. In addition to more sanctions, the U.S. tonight is deploying 7,000 American ground troops to Germany as Washington works to bolster its NATO allies. I asked Secretary of State Blinken, what now, in just a few moments. But first, our team is in place again, from the White House and Moscow to the battlefield, which is where we start with Richard Engel.
It was unprovoked, but this is what Russian President Vladimir Putin unleashed on Ukraine as the sun came up this morning. A missile striking an industrial park in western Ukraine. A helicopter assault on an airport outside of Kiev. Close, intense fighting. And there are civilian casualties. Local officials say this apartment building was struck in eastern Ukraine. Heartbreaking images of people bloodied, staggering out of their homes. And this is what remains of another family's apartment, a baby stroller among the debris. We traveled to this Ukrainian military installation near the eastern port city of Mariupol.
This radar station took a direct hit. Russia is picking off Ukraine's military facilities one after another, but Ukrainian troops are fighting back, and Russia is also suffering losses here.
Ukraine says it's destroyed some Russian tanks using American-supplied missiles, that this is a damaged Russian helicopter, and that it has captured some Russian soldiers. On day one, the army has been holding strong, but they're being pushed to the limit by Russia's full-scale invasion with attacks across Ukraine, which is the size of Texas, from areas near those pro-Russian enclaves in the east to the capital Kiev in the west. Even capturing the still radioactive Chernobyl nuclear reactor. It all began from a desk before dawn, when Russian President Vladimir Putin declared a special military operation on Russian television. Russia cannot feel safe, develop, and exist with a constant threat emanating from the territory of modern Ukraine, he said, describing the government in Kiev as a junta of neo-Nazis determined to build nuclear weapons. It was a split-screen moment, Putin announcing his assault as his actions were slammed at the UN Security Council, Ukraine's ambassador blasting Russia's representative.
The Russian president declared a war on the record. Should I play the video of your president? There is no purgatory for war criminals. They go straight to hell.
Later, after Putin stopped speaking on cue, the missiles and airstrikes began. Russian tanks rolling across the border from Belarus in the north and Crimea in the south. For Ukrainians, the choice was to hide in deep Soviet-era subways built long ago to shelter Ukrainians from an American attack, or to run if they could get through the traffic heading out of Kiev, or to ride it out, stocking up on food and cash.
How are you feeling? This is your mother.
I'm trying to keep my children calm. Putin is not helping. We are Ukraine, she says.
Putin says he's doing Ukrainians a favor by trying to get rid of their Nazi fascist government. What do you think about that?
He isn't protecting us, she says. It would be better if he sat there in Russia and did not touch anyone or anything here. Ukraine is fighting for its right to exist as a sovereign country and against a man who says Ukraine belongs to him.
Richard joining us now. Richard, Putin insists he's not trying to occupy Ukraine, but what can you tell from what you've been seeing about what might be the goal here?
Well, he might not want to occupy Ukraine, but he certainly wants to overthrow the government. And to do that,
not just the United States, but all our allies, all our NATO allies, are going to make this incredibly painful for them.
Thune says that the U.S. and its allies must support Ukraine and impose costs against the Russian aggressors.
Well, from gas prices to your 401k, a lot of people are wondering how Russia's invasion of Ukraine will impact their personal finances. KELO's Renee Ortiz spoke with 2 local professors to find out what you can expect.
I would say that in terms of real economic damage, U.S. is pretty insulated from the Russian economy.
Russia's invasion into Ukraine sent the stock market on a wild swing.
Stock prices represent traders' beliefs about the future profits of companies traded in the stock market. So if stock prices go down, that means the traders on average think that some profits in the future will be lost.
These dips are most likely short-term reactions.
Investors are afraid of uncertainty, so the market will decline. But we're not going to enter a bare long-term decline, of the stock market. It's going to be short-term effects, and these things tend to bounce back rather quickly.
There are also concerns with sanctions increasing oil and gas prices in the U.S.
It will have an effect on travel because airline prices. It'll have effect on travel internally. But most people think that will decline. It's going to be a short-term spike because people are worried, and then it'll start to decline a little bit.
If things resolve faster than expected, if the damage will be less than expected, then the market will bounce back quickly.
We're probably not going to go back to $2 a gallon gas or $2.50, but it'll probably stabilize after this first shock of this invasion.
Renee Ortiz, KELO News.
Stocks in Europe fell sharply, while stocks in the U.S. recovered from some earlier losses. Ukraine is one of the largest countries in Europe, at about 3 times the size of South Dakota. While conflict with Russia is part of the country's fabric, so is farming and tourism. Ukraine has 24 provinces and has been independent since 1991. Digital reporter Ray Yost takes a look at the country's history in a KELOLAND.com original.
A forensic exam of the South Dakota Corn Utilization Council says that there was inappropriate behavior in how the books were handled, but no fraud. A CPA firm released.
Warning Americans will feel an impact, with already high gas prices expected to rise even more.
I will do everything in my power to limit the pain the American people are feeling at the gas pump. But this aggression cannot go unanswered.
And Peter, something else we noticed, despite mentioning it before, President Biden today did not sanction Putin personally. Is that still on the table?
Yeah, that's right, Lester. The president
found the body. And in this little snippet, you're going to hear how Jason Ravnsborg acted when he found that body.
I said, he called my name. I looked at him. He said, "There's a man." I walked over in the general direction of where he was pointing, between him and the ditch, and saw Mr. Bieber.
Now, again, this is the first time we're hearing some of this information. Right now, Emily Savell and Michael Moore, the attorneys who prosecuted the case, are testifying before the committee. You can watch that on the Dakota News Now Facebook page and website. Brian and Andrea.
All right, Austin Goss, thank you. Staying in Pierre tonight, state lawmakers discussing a resolution that would address Governor Noem's involvement with South Dakota's real estate appraiser program. At issue is a meeting held by Noem involving her daughter, Cassidy Peters, and state officials after Peters was denied an appraisal license. Peters later did obtain that license, but last November turned it back in due to the fallout over that meeting. House Bill 7004 was introduced by John Mills, a representative out of Volga. In it, it states that Noem's actions were unacceptable and not in line with the state constitution or her oath of office. A major magazine recognizing a Sioux Falls business.
And it all has to do with what employees think of working there. We have details on that in about 13 minutes. Phil.
We've had a stretch of very cold days, but a warming trend is right around the corner. Details coming up around 6:17.
The community of Garrettson in shock after their high school principal was fired last night. The story of what happened next on Dakota News Now at 6.
So, Lisa, you were there for the president's remarks today, and you've been talking to people. Tell us what message people are taking away from what he had to say.
Well, the president has been observing these events, monitoring them closely, we're told, by White House officials, from the residence and from the Oval Office throughout this. And it was clear tonight in his address, this afternoon in his address, that he was speaking to the American people. The message he is trying to send is one of expectation setting, realizing that this is not just a war about territory, but Vladimir Putin is setting a war about ideology. It's important, the White House says, that President Biden is stressing to the American people that this is about American values, the idea of freedom itself, something he says America must fight for. And he warned very clearly, Judy, that Americans may feel some pain from this, especially at places like the gas pump. He also did something interesting, setting expectations about time frame here. He told us today in the East Room of the White House that he expects Ukraine will feel this, will have a difficult, hard road ahead of it for weeks and months. That is a longer spectrum. And it's also important that he noted that he again stressed he will not send troops to Ukraine to fight Russia, but he clearly said if NATO allies themselves are attacked, then in fact that is on the table.
And Lisa, we heard the president also suggesting that there could be even harsher, more powerful sanctions to come. What would those be, and why hold off on them?
This is such an important part of the conversation right now at the White House and around Washington, in fact, around the world. Let's look at some of the sanctions that have not yet been launched by the White House, by the American administration here. First, at the top of the list, no sanctions yet against Vladimir Putin himself. Talking to sources on the Hill and here at the White House today, there is divide over whether that would be effective and, in fact, if they could even track down his actual assets. Second, something called secondary sanctions. Those are important. That's the idea of sanctions against banks, institutions, businesses which actually interact with Russian banks. These are the kinds of sanctions that really had such an effect on Iran, North Korea. That is something that this White House has not deployed yet. And then finally, the idea of shutting Russia out of the SWIFT banking system. That's not something the U.S. controls, but it is something that the U.S. could levy enough sanctions on to essentially freeze Russia out. That is something that it's debated how worthwhile it is, what effect it would have, but it is something that remains on the table. Why hasn't this administration launched